Hi, I'm Roy Collin, and I'm the creator of the podcast. You can find everything about me and the five podcasts on bio.link/podcaster, and you'll find it in the QR code there. I'd also like to thank my sponsors. If you or someone you know is struggling with anxiety and want to know how to be 100% anxiety free in 6 weeks without therapy or drugs, Daniel Packard Anxiety Solution Program Company offers a 6 weeks system that permanently solves anxiety at an astounding 90% success rate. People who join the program only pay at the end once they have clear, measurable results. If you're interested in learning more, go to permanentanxietysolutions.com where you can book a free consultation with Daniel. Do you have high blood pressure and want to get off the meds? Doctors are amazed at what Zona Plus can do. Get a $50 discount with my code ROY. Go to zona.com/discount/ROY and you see the QR code for all my sponsors down at the end. Quality Polish manufacturer of metal products for telecommunication and workshop equipment and other metals. If you'd like a brochure, you see it in the QR code, and you just let us know if you would like a quotation shipped internationally and very competitive rates. I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast.
Welcome to the Awakening Podcast. You can find all our episodes on awakeningpodcast.org. We're also on BitChute and Rumble, and sometimes I can put them on my personal YouTube channel if it's not too controversial. And you'll find my 4 other podcasts: meditation, learn Polish, crypto, and speaking, as well as my podcast coaching on bio.link/podcaster. My guest today from Holland, innovator, certified coach and trainer, generalist, but he's also multiple author. He's done a lot of books. Please welcome Arnold Beekes. Did I?
Beekes.
Beekes. I apologize, Beekes. we were talking prior to recording, and I still was struggling. So welcome to the show, Arnold.
Thank you very much, Roy.
So you might let the listeners a bit. I know you've MA in law and everything, but you might just let them know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, well, being a generalist means I know a lot about a lot of different areas because I'm extremely curious. We were just discussing another guest on your podcast where if I compare myself to that guy, probably there's nothing related to that. But it's like, yeah, my curiosity drives a lot. But what has been the main thing is for after I studied law, but I never practiced it. But I started working in as an employee, where I mainly focused on technology and organizational leadership. I managed small groups of people from 10 marketeers up to 6,000 people in European context. Then in the US, they would call it the perfect storm. So a lot of things happened in my life and in my work, and I changed. So I became an entrepreneur, and I focused more on personal leadership and psychology, the human part of things. And now that was for another 20 years. So first 20 years employee, then 20 years entrepreneur. And now I hope that I'm giving the next 20 years to share and coach and teach and train other people for what I was fortunate to learn throughout those first 40 years.
Yeah, excellent. So I know it's kind of like the brain is a lot of the things that we'll be talking about, but one of the things to start with, because I think we've been conditioned from a young age, what we learned from our family, and I've heard you discussing that, and I think it's kind of a good place to start, that we can open it up there.
Yeah, it's a literal start, and as a matter of speech, a start. So what I say to people is the moment we are born, we are being conditioned to do what other people want you to do. So the moment you're born, you're a baby, you have your family, your father and mother. And when are you a good baby? That's when you exactly do what your parents ask you to do. That's where it starts, and that remains when in your upbringing, everything when you're supposed to do what your parents tell you to do, you're a good kid. Then you go to school. So when are you a good student at school? When you do what your teacher tells you to do. Then maybe you go to university or some kind of vocational training. Same thing. When are you a good student? When you do what your professor or your teacher tells you to do. Then you start to work. So when are you a good employee? When you do exactly what your boss tells you to do. So by the time you're in your beginning of your 20s or your mid-20s, the only thing what you've learned is to meet the expectations of other people. So by the time, the only thing what you have learned, and of course there are exceptions, but this is really the rule for most people, the only thing what you have learned is what I call to live someone else's life. You've totally not learned to live your own life. Because you're constantly, your attention is focusing on other people and meeting their expectations. And for a lot of people, this whole process continues basically until you die. And for some people, including myself, it changes, something happens in your life. Mostly it's outside of yourself, something is triggered, and then you start, some shift happening. But it's a process where most people, through most of their life, are living someone else's life. I call that fitting in.
The whole education system was infiltrated to make us compliant, that we actually fit into the corporate system. They don't want entrepreneurs. Even the last few years, we saw that they were shutting down all the entrepreneurs and, making sure all these corporations were doing very well. None of them were shut down.
Yeah, well, the educational system, which is more or less the same all over the world, it started around the 1850s, where people were supposed to go to classrooms and things like that. Before that, it didn't exist. But their main objective, or one of their main objectives, is to make people obedient. And to sit in classes in rows and do exactly what your teacher tells you to do. So in that way, you were prepared. That's when the education system started in the industrial age, is to work in a factory. And most of the factories were kind of an assembly line type of work. So that means you had to do it the right time, the right thing, and what somebody else tells you to do. That was the goal of education. However, the world has changed. I would say that most people are no longer working in assembly lines, but the education system has remained the same.
Like I remember, we start school early in Ireland 4. It used to be 7 in Poland, no, it's 6, but it's very early in. I think the UK is the same, but it was a case of we had to put our finger up to our mouth and fold our arms, and you were doing that for a few years, and then you go to an event and because you've been conditioned to fold your arms when you're so-called learning, people then on the stage are saying, the people that are folding their arms are blocking, they're not actually accepting the information coming in. And they forget that we have been conditioned, and a lot of people have been conditioned in just how they sit.
Yeah, it's excellent observation, Roy. It's that's the way it is. But that's the way how conditioning works, is that you do things which you're supposed to do, and you've been doing them for decades, that you don't even know that you're doing that. Yeah. So what you're explaining to me was oh yeah, wow, he's right. Yeah, so it's but if you've been doing this for year after year after year after year, you don't think it's oh, is it strange that I'm sitting like this? No, it's just become part of you. It's become unconscious behavior.
Exactly. So, like, there's so many different things with the brain, right? And I suppose the brain health, because, being conditioned is one thing, and negative thinking. How can we break the pattern?
You can only break the pattern, which I call the shift from fitting in. We just described what the fitting in, and I call it a brain operating system. Just like the operating system on a computer, we have societal operating systems. Maybe we'll discuss later. But I call them a brain operating system. So the one we just described is fitting in brain operating system. You can get out of that and move to another brain operating system, which I call flying out. Yeah, so from fitting in to flying out. And flying out is where you start to live your own life instead of living the life of someone else. How does that happen? Because that's your question. The main thing, what I'm seeing, what I notice, what I experience, is a lot of pain. Mostly mental, emotional pain. When you say, hey, or something happened, is like, well, you've been an employee and you're laid off, and you're like, well, now it's finally time that I want to start my own business. It has been a dream for a long time. It's never been possible, but because I get laid off, I get a little bit of money, now it's possible. That's more of a positive. But for most people, it's some kind of a pain. Yeah, you're laid off, you get a divorce, you maybe get a serious disease. Yeah, all of those things is where you're triggered to, like, where some condition, outside condition, says stop. I use the metaphor of, like, imagine you're in a sports school, in the gym, and you get these treadmills. Normally you got a whole row of treadmills. Yeah, so people go to the gym and then they start running on these treadmills. So you watch to the left, all people on the treadmill. You watch to the right, all people on the treadmill. So you don't think you're an idiot that you're running on a treadmill. Huh? Because you see everybody running. Yeah, some is a little bit faster, some is a little bit slower, but in the essence, he's like, well, everybody's doing that. Huh? But what happened in my case is that, suppose somebody puts a stick into the treadmill and you drop off. Huh? And then you're like, huh? I was running like an idiot on the treadmill and I didn't even know. That's when something started. That's when something clicked in my case. It took me 40 years. Where something clicked, like, hey, is that the way I want to spend my life, just running on a treadmill, going nowhere?
Brilliant. What I've noticed is, for those that think differently, especially in Poland, I think they're really more conditioned compared to Ireland. And I thought it would change, because obviously 89 they came out of the communism. But the people that have left Poland and come back, once they left the country, it's like they open their minds and they're no longer thinking the same way. And also people that kind of take up painting and stuff like that, they get creative, they get into music, they start thinking differently as well. They start using their creative side of their brain.
Yes, it's a matter of being exposed to something else, getting the experience, whatever, and it's like, oh, wow, that's interesting. So instead of running on a treadmill, you could work in the garden, or you could paint, or you could do other stuff. And then you're like, oh, I didn't know, but that's actually quite nice. So it's a matter of getting that experience. The same thing is with traveling abroad. If you always stay within your country, within your culture, you think that is the world. A simple example comes to mind. When I worked in the corporate environment, it was an American company. And the headquarters was in the US, so you had all these VPs and senior VPs, and now and then they wanted to come and visit Europe. And this was the time before there was the euro. And these guys would do a tour of Europe. Yes, they go to Netherlands, Belgium, France, and UK, whatever. But I tell you, most, if not all of them, had no clue that you couldn't pay with the dollar. And that every border, every country in Europe had a different currency. So for them, it was like, what? And these were senior VPs. I'm talking about hotshot guys. Yeah. And so why am I using this example? Is like when you get exposed to another thing, when they start to understand, is like, yeah, when I worked in the IT, when they introduced a new product, they need to have manuals and things, but we need to have a manual in French, in Italian, in Dutch, in whatever. And for them, it was just in English, and then it's done. Yeah. So it's a lot of work. And they were like, oh, wow, you got all these languages, you got these currencies, you got this stuff. That's when something happens in people. When you're exposed to something else, when you get that experience, yeah, and whether you well, this was kind of a positive experience. When you get kicked out of the treadmill, it's a negative experience, but that's when things start to shift. The same thing what you said with your Polish guys. It's like when you're exposed to other cultures and that things can be done differently, that's when you're like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't know about that.
Excellent. There's another thing. There's a phrase I never liked, and it was like, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So it was kind of like you get to a certain age and they're going like, it doesn't make sense. To me, even if you're 90, you can learn something new. And just what way is the brain work that to kind of knock that on the head?
Well, it's what they call neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is the capability of your brain cells, called neurons, to form new connections. And if you have these new connections, well, you learn something. And that can exactly go on until you're in your 90s or whatever. But that is, most people still, I think, to this day, don't know that is the way your brain works, and that you have that capability. So most people think by the time you're 25 or something like that, you're done. Yeah, your personality is fixed, your learning is fixed. Well, yeah, you'll learn very small, tiny things, but that's it. Yeah? And that is very, very detrimental. Yeah, to your health, to your growth, to who you are as a human being, to your relationships, to your connections, to everything. Because your thing is like, how many times, Roy, have you heard somebody say, is like, that's just the way I am? But that's another way of saying I can't change, or I won't change. Yeah. So, but neuroplasticity, and that's something which you have, which anyone have, or whatever. I've seen my uncle. He now doesn't live anymore, but he was a professor. He had a PhD student that was a lady in her 90s. Yeah, so all of these things are absolutely possible. But again, that's the power of our beliefs. If I believe that I cannot change, if I believe I cannot learn, if I believe that, well, I finished school, now I'm done learning, then that's your truth.
With me, it was the public speaking. I used to always say, I'm not good at public speaking. I don't like public speaking, until I made a decision I need to be good at public speaking. And I just totally changed it, embraced it, and then got to a stage where it wasn't a problem anymore. But it was I was my worst enemy for that. And I think for most people, they always have something, whether it's public speaking, but there's always something, and we're just putting a block in. It's using that as the excuse.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's an excuse, but sometimes is people really believe it. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
But that is, what I call the conditioning is like a lot of people want you to believe like that because then they can easily control you. But it's like the moment you realize like all these labels, all these things, you can change that, and you don't need to behave according to a label of someone else. Yeah, and the moment you realize that, your whole world changes. Yeah, your whole perspective on world change, on yourself. Yeah? For instance, I used to be a guy, like I mentioned in the intro, I managed very, very large group of people. But I was not, people who knew me, I get a very good relationship, but towards strangers, I could not easily build a relationship, or I was not even interested in it. And now I talk with the guy who delivers the newspapers early in the morning when I go for a walk. I have a whole talk with that guy, or the cashier, or some kind of a guard to make sure that my bike doesn't get stolen. So I previously people would say, no, you're very closed guy, whatever. Now people were like, within 5 minutes with a stranger, I have an interesting conversation.
Which kind of helping your brain then for as you aging. Because what I've noticed is my grandmother, she lived till just a few weeks short of 96. She used to love doing crosswords and reading. And I think definitely keeping your brain active instead of vegetating in front of the television and having no meaning in life is what's actually allows us to live longer and happier.
It's absolutely true. Yeah, that there is a lot which we can do, and I would suggest you should do. But again, it's your own choice. Yeah. So now, a lot. There was research published last week, which says that 50% of people over 75 have some kind of Alzheimer type of disease. That's half. At the other end, there's a lot of research which shows that basically, well, to make it simple, there are two things. One thing you mentioned is like, if you keep your brain busy, doing something challenging, doing something complex, learning something, satisfying your curiosity. So keep it busy. And crossword is just a very small, tiny item of that. That's one part. So keep it working. That's basically what it is. If you don't use it, one of my slogans on one is, you don't use it, you lose it. The other part which you can influence yourself is lifestyle. And lifestyle means do some exercise, eat good food, get good sleep, all of those things. So there's a lot of stuff which you can influence yourself. It's not 100% guarantee, but it's pretty high. It's pretty high that you can influence those things. So, but if you're just like, well, yeah, it's like, I'm 65 or whatever, I retire, and you're sitting all day in your chair watching TV, like you said, well, then I'm going to guarantee you that within 5 to 10 years, you're done. But I'm very inspired by, look at interviews with David Attenborough. The guy's in his 90s. Yeah, I've heard
Incredible
podcasts with professors who were in the 90s and said, no, I finished, there's another book. Yeah, this morning I was listening to an interview with Ken Wilber. He's the guy about integral theory. He said he's 74 and he's writing new books all the time. Huh? So that doesn't mean that all these things is like that's what you and me and a younger person can do. Yeah? We see now dementia with people in their 50s, but if you live like a plant, you do nothing all day, whatever, or sitting behind your screen, yeah, then for sure something nasty will happen. But the good news is there's a lot in your control which you can do. But you need to do it from a young age, as young as possible. If you haven't followed your curiosity, if you haven't learned anything new since you left school and now you're in your 60s, and when I say is, well, you gotta learn new stuff or whatever, well, then it is very hard, if not impossible. If you never exercised and you're in your 50s, whatever, and someone says, well, you need to exercise, whatever, it's like, huh? So it's also about, from a young age, build up those because they're also habits. And if you build up those habits, it's very easy to continue doing that.
We mentioned about kind of being conditioned and working for a corporation. I mean, I know of a lot of people, and I'd say most people would know somebody that's worked as an employee until they're 65, 68 now, where they're changing it in some countries. And within 6 months, they passed on because it's like their life was their work and they had no other interests in their life. And it's, it's sad to see like that that's what they have, like.
Exactly. And that is so sad, because a lot of them think is like, by the time I'm retiring, I'm going to finally do what I wanted to do.
Exactly.
And then that shift is too big. Yeah. And their whole life has been related to the work. So, and it doesn't mean I say work is not good, but it's not only work. It's all of those things. And yeah, exactly, that's happening. So it all proves that you should try from as young as possible to start living your own life and do your own things, and well, get out of that treadmill, because that treadmill is in essence very, very unhealthy. Have you heard about, there's this, well, it's a book, it's a research, whatever. It's an Australian nurse who worked in a, I forget the English name.
Palliative care place, is it? Kind of end of
yeah,
life.
where's the last place when you go, when certain you're going to die?
Yeah.
She's been working there for years and years and years. And she used to ask to those people who were having cancer or something like that, whatever it is, hospice. So, and she asked him and said, what are your biggest regrets? And she used to ask that to all the people. So she did that for years and years and years. Now, out of that, well, there's now a book, there's everything around that. But there came a top 5 of regrets. What do you think is the number 1?
I suppose friends and family.
That's part of it. But that's not number 1. Number 1 is not living a life true to myself. That's what I call the fitting in. Yeah? So I think that's extremely sad. Yeah, it's that means that those people, for all of their life, they've been living someone else's life. They didn't live their own life. And I didn't mention in the beginning about the fitting in, but think about relationship, marriage. Yeah, it's totally fitting in most of the time. Yeah. So how sad it is when you're in your 70s, 80s, and your life is done, and it's like, well, I basically didn't do what I wanted to do.
And what about, like, because sometimes technology, it helps us and we obviously realize the benefits. But if we look at, say, like AI now, and also even say GPS, because that's something that I've noticed myself. Obviously, when I was growing up younger, you didn't really have that. You were looking at maps, you knew everywhere you could drive. Even when I go back now, I can remember all the different beaches and loads of brilliant places to go just without putting in a GPS. But say here in Poland, I just got so used to it. And then when sometimes your phone doesn't work or gets blocked or so, it's like a brain fart. You're like, where am I? Where do I go? And you've just passed over your brain to this computer technology. And AI is kind of similar, where a lot of people, they're getting it to do everything. Because I've seen people in shops and simple mathematics. I'm good at maths, but I'd be looking at people, or I go to the farmer to get some eggs and a few different things. I have it in my head immediately. And I see most people, they cannot do even basic mathematics without having the phone out to do the calculator. And we have to be cautious of that as well.
Well, that's putting it politely, I would say. I think it is a very, very serious problem, especially, but not only the younger people, because I see it also with people in their 30s and 40s who are having the same problem. So it's not only the young folks, the teenagers and the 20s. The conveniences of those tools, if you got to use them in the right way, otherwise it completely atrophies your brain, because you're not used to using your brain. Yeah, it's like, let me use the example. When I was at high school, I had 6 years learning German. So I was fluent in German, read, write, everything. It was the time the only foreign TV station was German, so German was fine with me. Now I'm many years later, I think in my life, if I've spoken 10 times German, it's kind of, that's what it is. I totally forgot. Yeah. When people speak German to me, I can understand 95%. But when you ask me now to speak German, I sound like a 3-year-old kid. Yeah, so it's like I totally forget all that stuff. But that's what happened with our brain. If we don't use it, again, you lose it. So the same thing is with these tools, is if you don't learn to calculate without those tools, if you don't use your memory or whatever, yeah. I just heard it, like in the old days, you need to, memorize 5 to 10 phone numbers, yeah, of your parents, of your friends, or whatever. Yeah.
I remember working in Ireland, and I could remember all of the companies that I was actually, like, I was working for a contractor. I had them in a book, but I remembered them off, and I'm talking about hundreds of phone numbers that I remembered. I was doing, when I was 11, I started doing newspapers for about 10 years, but I had about 70 or 80 customers selling all different things, like Sunday papers, magazines, as well as I was doing all of that in my head. I was able to remember who paid me, how much they were to owe me, and everything. If I had to do that now, it's like I even have to make a list of where my lists are, just to compile everything.
Yeah, but again, it's like, if you don't use it, you lose it. But before you're able to use it, you need to train it. Yeah? So if it's not trained at all, yeah, you have a basic problem. Because it's like, I can recall when you talked about GPS, it's like a few years ago, I was on the bike. It was a little bit outside of the town where I live. And there was a car stopping, and they said, sir, can we ask you something? I said, fine. And they said, our GPS system in the car doesn't work, and we don't know where to go. And they asked for a very big roundabout where it was in which direction. They had no clue whether they have to go this way, that way, whatever. And I said, well, if you look out the window, you can see the roundabout over there. Huh? So it's with all of these things, is like, before you get to the stage of use it and lose it, if you're not trained to use it at all, you're not going to develop that capability. And that is very, very worrisome, especially now with the ChatGPT kind of things, the generative AI, what we're moving towards is like, it's like, I don't need to think at all. That system provides me all the answers and stuff. So I don't need to calculate. I don't need to memorize. I don't need to think and whatever. That means that the people end up is that you have no initiative, you have no memory, you have no working capacity, you have no critical thinking. You are not able to read, write, all of those things. That's what we see now with young people. It's extremely worrisome. And we're not even talking that a lot of people, they assume what your ChatGPT-like tools provide you as an answer, that's the truth.
And I've exposed that. And what's strange is it wouldn't allow me to upload it on BitChute, and I'm not sure about Rumble, but I basically had things where they've confirmed that they lied on the ChatGPT. So people are typing in something, making assumptions that that's the truth. It's like a Google search. Is this safe or is it not safe? And it depends on the question you ask. But unfortunately, people are actually not even using their own critical thinking, and they're just accepting, Uncle Chatbox there just said, this is the answer, so it has to be the answer.
Exactly. But that's why I say is like, I'm very worried about that, because it's like, if you cannot use your worry, you have the attention span of a goldfish. You cannot critical think. You cannot.
And just on that, actually, because the attention span of a goldfish, because that's something that we've all heard that a goldfish has a 5-second memory. I had goldfish. They knew when I was feeding them the next day. So that proves that does not exist. That is incorrect. And there's so many times people are regurgitating. I've even had cases, but I don't know, was it Brian Tracy? There was somebody that was saying a story about a Harvard study, and it was being regurgitated everywhere. And it turned out it never happened. There was one of my guests exposed it. And a lot of the time, we're doing that as well. We're hearing something with actually taking a few layers off, going, and I'm like you, generalist. It's like, sometimes I'll have a guest on and they'll say something. I go, oh, that's interesting, but I can't take it at heart. I'll have to start taking a few layers off and start getting a few books and stuff like that. Most people don't do that. They have their belief system is this, and you could put proof in front of them and they'll just jump over the proof and still stick with their thought process.
Yeah, but that's why I say is why I'm worried, because those are critical skills which we all need to have. And if we don't have those skills, which is currently the case with a lot of people, you can be easily influenced, conditioned. And that's what's happening, because people, they assume already it's true, but they don't even know how to find out what you did. It's like, I can find out whatever. I've recently heard the same story. Is like people saying that the smell of a dog is much better than the smell of human beings. And I recently heard a podcast with a professor in smell, and he said that's totally not true. It's like human smell is just as good as that from animals. And so, and then they had tried to find out, is like, who said that? And they said, yeah, it was this person. He said it there, whatever. And it appeared that it was a former colleague, whatever. They asked him, said, no, I didn't say it like that. So we all make these assumptions like, oh, it's being said, and we believe that. So testing assumptions, I think, is one of the most critical things which we need, especially in these days. But that capability is totally lacking. And that means people become easily influenced, conditioned, what I call robotized.
There's one of the things, it was one of my parents that is normally when you'd hear people say, they say, and it's like, who's they when they're at home? And I think it's just always ask who's they, because people use that as a kind of, oh, they say. And it's an easy cop out. And you know, the reality is we have to take the layers off to find out what's better. But going like into how technology as well with the phones, because like, I mean, I've seen it recently, grandparents with the grandchildren, and the whole lot of them are on the phone. It's something I never do. When I'm there with my youngest son, we don't go on our phones. Like, we make it, you know, we're sitting, we're eating together, and we're talking to. But like, the majority of people now, they're hours and hours looking for the dopamine hit, and their heads are down. And not only are they actually going to have problems with their necks because of that, but I've heard of a lot of problems with thumbs and hands as well, because, but like, it's the same thing. They're kind of like, it's like a zombie brain dead mode when they're scrolling along.
Yeah, well, there's even a formal disease which they call digital dementia. So we know dementia from an old age, but a lot of young people have digital dementia, which means that it's the phone and the constant look for instant gratification, seeing things, other people are having better lives, better things, whatever. So they feel very anxious, they feel depressed, and whatever. That is digital dementia. Yeah, the attention span, which we already discussed. So it's extremely detrimental. Yeah, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, everything. Yeah? So, but people treat it like, well, it's kind of their god. Yeah? So it has a very, and again, these things is like, use it as a tool, but as a tool only. So it's not your master. Yeah? So that is extremely critical. So it was last week that the Chinese government has ordered that children can only access social media and their phones for a maximum of 2 hours a day. So it was the central government who said that. It depends on your age class or whatever. They get different things, but a maximum of 2 hours. So people know how detrimental it is for your health, for your well-being, for all the things we have been discussing.
And I've heard, like, say, the likes of TikTok in China, they're educating the children with all the stuff that they're seeing. Whereas here in the rest of the world, it's all silly dances, all stupid things. And people then, you know, that's their thing that they love to watch, and they just keep doing it. Whereas, you know, there's such a difference. None of them then are trying to learn anything from this.
Yeah, but it's even so that the TikTok in China is different from the TikTok outside of China. So it's basically ruining people. Yeah, and it's not, well, you already see children of 6-7 years with these phones and working on the iPad of their parents and whatever. But I recently spoke to a couple of professors at universities, and they say, is like, my students, I basically have to teach them to read and write because they cannot do that. It was no joke. It was absolutely serious, and they were extremely frustrated because is that it makes my job really lousy, because that's not what I want to teach.
Real. And if we look at, say, like, you know, people with depression and stuff like that, because, you know, before, yeah, they go to the doctor signs Prozac and all these other different things, and the side effects are terrible, but they never actually tell them, go into, are you doing any actually physical activities? Are you drinking clear water and stuff like that? Are you? So you might just kind of talk on that, because I know it's a major problem internationally.
Yeah, it's already not only among younger people, it's all age categories. Yeah? So it's around 30-40% of the people. Yeah? So only some of it is really genetically maybe inherited or whatever. It is a problem. A lot of it has got to do with your behavior, with your lifestyle, with your habits. And that creates that depression. And exactly what you said is that they give you medicine, but the medicine only, in not even in all cases, but in some cases, it relieves some of the symptoms. It numbs you down. That's what it does. But it doesn't cure anything. It doesn't address the cause of these things. Yeah. So it's symptom relief. It doesn't go to the root cause. It doesn't address the root cause of these things. If you would address the root cause, more than half, and I'm very conservative here, more than half of them you can solve if you say, spend less time on your thing. Go get some exercise. Don't eat ultra-processed food. Don't watch all of these things on your Instagram where you think that your friends have a better life than you have. And they look better and nicer and whatever. Well, that's because they know how to use Photoshop. You see, it's like all of those things is complete BS. Yeah. So, well, I'm even inclined to say 75% or whatever, but it's a very large percentage of things you can cure depression.
With, like, because your background in the workplace and everything, like loads of people, they get extremely stressed and eventually burn out. What's the best way to try to nip that in the bud? Because sometimes, like they're kind of breaking their backs to comply and make the boss happy. They're not happy themselves. They haven't touched into their inner selves. But what's the best way of kind of preventing that from happening?
A couple of things. The main thing what you need is to learn to say no. To create some boundaries and say, hey, this is the maximum. This is what I can do. Now we're crossing a boundary, and that impacts my health and everything else. And if I fall apart, it's not beneficial to the company. It's not beneficial to me. And so learn to set your boundaries. And basically it means say no. Another major part of that is because the work is so stressful and they don't like it and whatever, people use a lot of what they call strategies for distraction. Yeah, so they drink a lot, they party a lot, maybe they use drugs, they go shopping, they go gaming, whatever. They're all strategies to get distracted from the shitty work. But those things make it worse. Yeah? So another strategy is like start doing some healthy things. Yeah? Go out for a walk, for a bike, which most people can do. Yeah? Eat some healthy food. Cook your food. Yeah? So, and stop doing these things, which are basically all of them, they're addictions. Yeah? So, because again, the addictions make the other thing worse. So it builds upon the other. One makes the other one worse. Yeah. So, and that leads to your burnout. So create healthy distractions. Read a book. Yeah. Go for a walk. Cook a healthy meal. It's very simple things, not very costly. Most of the people can do that. Yeah. And set boundaries.
With the food, because I don't think people, food and all the other things that are doing, but like I try as often as I can get organic, keep away from anything processed, and people they're looking for kind of, I'm working hard, I'll come back, I'll chuck it into the microwave. As soon as I realized the dangers of microwaves, I got rid of it, never got one again. But if you look at every single thing, like women with the makeup, they don't even know what's in it. I've had somebody on about just the lip balm alone. Most of them are toxic. So the lipstick as well, everything, aftershaves, every single thing you're putting on you. I encourage people, don't overwhelm yourself and do everything in 1 week, but just pick 1 or 2 a week. And once you realize that it's actually not healthy for you, you make a conscious decision to remove it from your life and go for the things that are helping you. And I think that will help with depression. It will help with stress. It will help with everything.
Yeah, but make those things into healthy habits. Yeah? And again, they don't need to be very complicated or cost a lot of money, whatever. Most of the things which are most healthy are very easy to do. Yeah? I go each morning at 6:30, I go for a half an hour walk. And you can say it's easy. Well, for me, it's not, because in a car accident, my heel was destroyed just recently. So, but even with me, is like I'm kind of a little bit handicapped. I can do it. So everybody can do that. Yeah, so, and well, that was before my accident, whatever. I started running, whatever, years and years ago. And then sometimes, well, you come from work. Oh, I'm tired. I'm not going to run today. It's lousy weather. I'm not going to run. Oh, there's something on TV. I'm not going to run. Yeah? So I realized that, and I was like, it's almost half of the times I'm not going. So that's when I made the decision, is like, I go always. So not choosing like priorities, whatever, is like I go always. So with my walk in the morning and thing, I go always, whether it's hot. This morning it was raining like crazy, like I go always. So it's very easy. I don't need to spend energy on like, what decision am I gonna take? It's like, no, I'm gonna walk today. And I feel great. So by the time this half hour, whatever, is like one of my best times in the day. So make it a habit. Do it every day. Make it simple.
And I've heard you talk about as well that you listen to a lot of podcasts as well, that actually, and you're walking, you listen to a podcast. I'm just saying, if I'm earning, don't like earning or just, I listen to a podcast as I'm doing that. And it's just, even on a commute, like, sometimes you might listen to the radio or whatever, but listening to a podcast or an audiobook or something like that you can double dip, basically. You're doing two things at once.
Yeah, but that's what I do all the time. I think I got more than 30 podcasts which I follow. Yeah, so it's like on my morning walk, is when I have my breakfast, when I go on my bike to the supermarket, I listen to your podcast. It's like, and people are like, how do you have that time? It's like, well, that's the time when you do nothing, or you listen to music, or you do nothing. It's like I combine the things. Yeah, so I get at least 1 hour a day, some new knowledge into me. And this is what I've been doing, well, 15 years, 10, 50. How long are the podcasts? And so it's like, that's why people are, well, you know a lot. It's like, well, if you would be doing 10, 15 years, 1 hour each day, you can't help it that you know a lot. And it's very easy because it doesn't cost me extra time. It doesn't cost me, and it's just, I combine things. Exactly. Like when you said ironing, or when I do vacuum cleaning, I listen to podcasts. I hate vacuum cleaning or cleaning the toilets, whatever. I listen to podcasts. Since I do that, I combine that. Cleaning the toilet, it's done before I know.
So just finally, because you're like a trainer and a coach. So what's kind of ideal clients for you?
People who say, I really want to change, but I don't know how. Yeah, it's like, I'm fed up with focusing only on the relief side and not on the cure side. But people really, really say, hey, I understand what you're saying. I want to make that switch, but I need some help in that area. That's one group. The other group of people is what I call very ambitious people. People where I can say, I can help you to upgrade your brain. If you if you want to create clean water solutions in the world, reduce pollution, water pollution, air pollution, you want to solve dementia, Parkinson, whatever it is. So try to do something good in the world. But if you do that with a fitting in brain, it's going to be very hard and very unlikely to be successful. So I say is I help you to upgrade your brain. You can go from fitting in to flying out, and you can also go from flying out to extraordinary. So if you really got big plans and you're ambitious, you want to do things, you need to upgrade your brain. So that's another category of people I help.
Brilliant. Listen, Arnold, thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. You might let people know how they can get in contact with you.
Well, I got my main website is Brain Athletes. It's plural.club. Brainathletes.club. And my email is arnold@brainathletes.club.
I'll make sure I'll put it both on the audio and the video. Thank you very much, Arnold.
Thank you.
So that's all for the Awakening Podcast. You can find all our episodes on awakeningpodcast.org. As mentioned, we're on BitChute and Rumble, and this one can go on YouTube because we didn't discuss anything that's too controversial. And you'll find my 4 other podcasts along with my coaching on bio.link/podcaster. Sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, share with your friends. Until next week, take care.
So I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. You'll find everything about me on bio.link/podcaster with all my podcasts, and you'll find it, you see in the QR code in the graphic that's shown. I'd like again to thank my sponsors. So if you or someone you know struggling with anxiety and want to know how to be 100% anxiety free in 6 weeks without therapy or drugs, Daniel Packard's Anxiety Solution Program company offers a 6-week system that permanently solves anxiety at an astounding 90% success rate. People who join the program only pay at the end once they have clear, measurable results. If you're interested in learning more, go to permanentanxietysolutions.com, where you can book a free consultation with Daniel. Do you fight blood pressure and or want to get off the meds? Doctors are amazed at what Zona Plus can do. You can get a $50 discount with my code ROY, zona.com/discount/ROY. And you'll see it in the QR code as well as Daniel's QR code. Quality manufacturer of metal products for telecommunication and workshop equipment and other metal materials. You see the brochure there in the QR code, and let me know if you would like a quotation, shipped internationally at very competitive price. I'd like to thank all my sponsors and also all my listeners. Be sure to give me a thumbs up, 5-star rating, share with your friends, really helps. And I also have a video on how to give a 5-star rating because a lot of people have wrote to me asking me that they don't know how to do that. Until next week, take care.